the biggest sticking point for the Conservatives right now is the economy, right? The main thing on everyone's lips is the economy. We've seen from the polling around what people's issues they care about from the local elections are. They don't care about the culture war. They don't really care about anything like that. They care about the economy and they care about the NHS. They care about the cost of living. These are all the main issues and they're issues that unite everybody. Right, there are certain people who have certain bugbears in certain areas, but no one can get away from the NHS crisis. No one can get away from the cost of living, and no one can get away from the general state of the economy. These are issues that unite literally everybody around what matters to them. And the Conservatives fundamentally cannot fix the economy. They can't fix the economy because they do not have the ideology to be able to fix the economy. That's the big issue that the Conservatives have. The biggest issue that they have is that they don't want to invest. They don't want to tax any more than they already are doing. They don't want to make any public investment. They don't want to do any further tax cuts because of what happened with how Liz Truss got burnt. Ironically, the Liz Truss tax cuts showed us that you can just MMT your way to keeping the economy afloat, because that's what happens to the pension funds with the latest round of QE. They reversed their QT back into QE with what happened to prop up the pension funds in the wake of the fiscal event, right? So they can't cut taxes because of what happened with the fiscal event. They can't raise taxes because taxes are already at their highest. They don't want to invest in any public services because they don't want to tax anymore to be able to do it from a balanced budget standpoint, and they will completely refuse to do it on the back of Keynesian deficit spending investment on infrastructure and on public services because that fundamentally disagrees with their ideology. And they don't want to do anything that would theoretically reverse the only other way that we could do for be actual to gain some kind of economic growth, which would be more immigration, which they've already said they've already tried to rule out on more immigration, and they've also ruled out any changing of Brexit post Windsor framework. Now that's passed through the Commons, right? Every single possible way that they could have of stimulating economic growth in this country, there's nothing. There's nothing that they can do. The economy is completely screwed, and they do not have the tools to be able to fix it. Labour obviously don't either. But when the Conservatives are going to be dealing with a stagnant economy, and one that's, again, was stagnant for them in 2017, but in 2017, crucially, it only affected poor people. It only affected working people, and that's why they flocked to Labour when they offered a positive vision. But now, everyone's affected by it, right? Interest rates remained low all the way through up until 2022. Throughout the elections in 2017 and 2019. So the core voter base for the Conservatives, which are middle-class homeowner types, like above median income homeowner types, there was no way they weren't voting for the Conservative Party. Because their main source of their own personal asset wealth, which is their property, maintained the same price for them. That was what was stable for them. They valued the stability, and that was never going to change. Working people in a post-Brexit world are always going to move over to Labour in 2017, given what happened because of austerity. But the economic picture of this country is completely different now. The core Conservative voter base have been absolutely shafted by the fiscal event, by Liz Truss, in a way that is irreparable for the Conservatives. The idea that interest rates are going to come down to the ridiculous lows that they were during the stagnant period from 2010 up to 2022, that's not going to happen. There's no way it can happen. There's no way it can happen at all. It's not going to happen whatsoever. And voters are going to turn to whatever party thinks represent them, that's not the Conservative Party. In the Southwest, where they're generally pretty conservative, in the blue wall seats, but who will never vote for Labour ever because they view them as a party of people who live in urban areas rather than rural areas. They will vote for the Liberal Democrats because they see them as essentially a pro-NIMBY but anti-Conservative party. And everywhere from the traditional Labour voting areas are voting Labour. In the cities, they're all voting Labour. If they're not voting Green, that is, in places like Brighton Pavilion or Bristol West. Scotland, SNP and Labour are going to sweep every seat. Conservatives are predicted to lose literally every single seat in Scotland, and that's not changing. They'll probably lose most of their seats in Wales as well. There is no path for the Conservatives to be able to win the next election on any grounds whatsoever. And how do you fix people's incomes being £11,000 behind where they were? What do you think the Conservatives are going to just reverse their trajectory on supply side labour market policy? That's a fantasy plan. That's a complete fantasy world. How can these problems be solved, though? They seem quite insurmountable. Deficit spending, right? So at the moment, our national debt is around about, it's the debt 90% of GDP. So our debt to GDP ratio is about 90% at the moment, which is very similar to where our national debt to GDP ratio was in 1945 at the end of the Second World War. And what did we do at the end of the Second World War? Did we go into full austerity mode, having you spent loads of money on the war economy of the Second World War? Which is basically what we've just come out of. We have just had war economy, not just because we are kind of already at proxy war with Russia, given the amount of arms we're sending to Ukraine. We were at war with COVID. COVID was a war economy. The economy shut down in a similar way to how the economy shut down during the Second World War. Did we go into austerity mode in 1945? Of course we didn't. In fact, we did massive state-led investment into new infrastructure on the supply side as well. Right? Not just on the demand side, but on the supply side too. We built an NHS, we built massive stock of council housing, we revamped the country, we created the post-war consensus, and we grew the economy so much in the wake of the war that even though we were deficit spending, the debt to GDP ratio still dropped and consistently dropped throughout the entirety of the Keynesian period from 1945 to 1979. And our overall average growth over that period was much higher of the post-war period than it has been over the neoliberal monetarist period from 1979 until today, because that's been economic policy that's been adopted by both Conservative and New Labour governments alike between the election of Thatcher and where we are right now. The only way of growing the economy is through Keynesian economics, which obviously Conservatives don't want to do because they don't believe in it ideologically. The only reason why they would ever deficit spend or use QE is if they want to pump money into the pockets of the rich, like they did in post-financial crisis, and like they did during the energy crisis, where they just used a deficit spending to prop up record profits for Shell and for BP and for Centrica. So there's no way they would use that for infrastructure. There would no way they're going to deficit spend when they have already said they want to balance the books. In fact, getting down the public debt is specifically is one of Rishi Sunak's mission statements, is what Jeremy Hunt said their target of doing was reduce it from like 95% to 92% was their projection of dropping the debt to GDP ratio, and they're doing it via austerity. And as we've seen, we had anemic growth throughout the austerity period from 2010 to 2019, essentially. We had pretty anemic national growth in this country, and we're projected to have continuous anemic growth coming out of the budget, as has been predicted by the IMF. We're going to have one of the lowest growths in the G7, lower than Russia. Our growth is going to be, because they don't want to engage in proper expenditure to be able to fix the country. And they're not going to reverse their supply side reforms on the labour market, which is the main reason why everyone is £11,000 on average worse off as a working person now than they were in 2010. Because that's fundamentally part of their ideology that they specifically believe in. And that's, if you're watching this is why you're poor. This is why your wages are shit. It's because the government have specifically been trying to do policies to specifically make you poorer on your wage packet, as a method of increasing the supply of labour, which hasn't even worked. All the supply side labour market policies, our labour force participation rate is one of the lowest in Europe still, as a result of the cuts to public services, basically as a result of our supply side labour market reforms. Ironically, they've not increased their supply, even though they're supply side reforms. All it's done is push down wages for working people and push up profits for multinational companies and the bourgeois and the super rich in this country. Not only have they taken loads of money out of your paycheck because of the economic reforms on the labour end that's been implemented by the Conservative government, things like breaking the back of the union movement, things like cutting benefits, for example, all these kind of things. Not only have they been made rich off of your own work and your labour and your productivity as members of the working class, they've also been just given huge amounts of money just printed out of the Bank of England and just shoved into their pockets to inflate asset prices to keep you even poorer than you were before. Watch Gary Stevenson's video on the asset economy and how continuous quantitative easing by the Bank of England on behalf at the behest of the government has been pumped into the pockets of the rich through the period of austerity from 2010 to 2015, and also during the pandemic too. The £700 billion has been printed and given out to the rich over the pandemic, and they've kept that, and they've used it to inflate asset prices to make sure that working people cannot get access to them to be able to grow their own asset wealth. And these things are fundamentally unfixable if you are a conservative government. If you believe what Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt believe, these are unfixable. Unfixable. And that's why the Conservatives will lose the next election. Not just because they've screwed over the country in general, but because they've hit not just the main body of the voter base in general, but they've hit their own voter base too, in ways that they have no solutions for. And Keir Starmer will be the next Prime Minister. There's no doubt that he'll be the next Prime Minister, which is sad because I don't want him to be Prime Minister. And I do think it'll be a majority government. But if there is a case that if it does turn out that people do get so sick of him that there is some kind of coalition, that'll be the best case scenario. But there is just no way. There's no way the Conservatives can win the next election. It's crucial to say, that the other thing to say, well, the economy's fucked, but they'll run on cultural issues. And we've seen it doesn't work. The culture war stuff doesn't work. The stop the boat stuff doesn't work. The anti-trans stuff doesn't work. It's not on people's radar. People don't care. People have bigger fish to fry. People have issues that are far more materially important to them, that they're not going to get lost in this culture war stuff, because even having been going on about it for months and months and months and months, it being pumped out by the press over and over and over again, an average of 4 anti-trans articles every single day by the right-wing press in our media to try and manufacture the consent for this stuff, it hasn't worked, right? It may not have pushed loads of people to voting for Labour. They've not had a massive increase in their overall vote share at the local elections, for example. But the Conservatives have completely lost out in the wake of all of this stuff. They have to. The fundamental, what we've learned from the local elections is that they have to fix the economy, and the culture war stuff doesn't work, and they can't do the first, and they won't stop the second. It's as simple as that. There's no chance. There's no chance at all. But if you enjoyed this content, you can like and subscribe. You can support me by becoming a member on YouTube for just 99p, or subscribing on Twitch for $3.99, or for free with Twitch Prime, or by making bits messages with text to speech on. If you're watching this live, or later, you can drop me bits if you're watching this, or join on. I have a Patreon now. You can join on Patreon if you really want. Patreon.com/NoJusticeMTG. If you want to give me money in a other different way than my other platforms.